Welcome to Politics Aside. My name is John Porter, and I appreciate you joining our show today. As I mentioned in prior webcasts, it's an opportunity for me to share with many of you some of the great leaders that I've met throughout the nation and around the world in my tenure in public service. I do think it's important that you have an opportunity to meet some of these top leaders, and especially our guest today, who I'll introduce here formally in a moment. But I only ask one thing, and that is you sit back, please put politics aside and soak up some of the inside scoop today. And we appreciate that. As I know Keith will talk about here in a moment, that as a former member of the U.S. Congress and a state senator, I've always had a passion and I've been a huge advocate for responsible gambling. Actually, in Nevada State Senate, I served on the Judiciary Committee where we had oversight and policy of gaming in the state of Nevada. So I've had a very strong interest watching the industry and watching the player and watching the consumer. And as been watching, there's been this evolution, and that evolution is from brick and mortar. And of course, then lotteries have been around for a long time, but the shift to technology and easier access to gaming. Well, all credit due to the gambling and gaming industry. They too are very concerned and care a lot about having the proper gaming tools, techniques, safety nets, and security in place to help their players. They care a lot. And you also add into the health community all those important parts of enjoying responsible gaming. Well, today I'd like to share, again, one of my friends that has been involved with the National Council on Problem Gambling in Washington, D.C. since about 1978. The organization was formed in 1972 as a neutral organization on formats of gambling. They just want to make sure, as an organization, their stellar board of directors and the organizations that fund the organization itself, that there is responsible gaming, that there's help for individuals that need help. And as a matter of fact, they've had 800 number and access all over the country for many years. So our guest today is Keith White, Executive Director of the National Problem Gambling Organization since 1998, as I mentioned, with over 20 years of an expert on national gaming issues. And I don't take and use those words lightly, Keith. You are the go-to person in the industry. Again, we have been at many events together and spoke together at many different gatherings. So 20 years of experience. You're recognized widely, not just by me, but by the country, and if not the world. You presented in 39 U.S. states, at least as of this Google search that I did.
Yes.
21 plus countries. Testified multiple times before the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Senate, and certainly have been a big part of numerous states and local government as they've been formulating policy. So what I want to talk about really is the organization. Keith, first, tell us about what's happening, what does it mean, why was it formed, and what's happening today?
Well, first, John, thank you so much for having me on. Politics aside, this is a fantastic opportunity to talk a little bit about our shared passion in responsible gambling and raise some of these key issues that changed and expanded a lot as the industry has expanded. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, because we meet it on these, the conference floor and panels and everything. So this is a nice format. But yeah, the National Council was founded in 1972 to be the advocate for problem gamblers and their families. And one of the reasons that was so important at that time is then and now, most people with gambling problems go to Gamblers Anonymous. And as a result of their participation in this anonymous group, they aren't really able to speak up and speak out like you might have and like you might need, to help kind of create the change that is going to lead to better, more modern gambling system. So NCBG was established in some ways as the voice of people who have gambling problems. But we also were the voice of counselors and professionals who were working with this group. And because we're neutral on legalized gambling, it made it easy for us to partner as well with state government, and then of course with the gambling industry. So we like to think of ourselves as the hub of the wheel. We work with all stakeholders because we have that stance of neutrality. But just to be clear, the reason for our neutral stance is because people with gambling problems are judged and shamed and stigmatized by a lot of other groups back then in 1972 and even today. So our stance on neutrality came from those members in recovery who wanted to make sure that we were one place where they weren't going to be judged, where they knew they could come to us because we were legal. And that's what leads to calls to our helpline and other things like that. So that's how we got started. And it's our 50th anniversary, and we've stuck to that commitment of neutrality and that ability to work with all stakeholders while being beholden to none.
Keith, I'm sure you get asked this question frequently. How are you funded?
Yes.
Is there special interests out there? And I know you've been very clear. And by the way, I know the answer to this question. You've been very neutral. But how are you funded? How does it work?
We believe anybody who profits from gambling has a responsibility to give some back. And so we certainly take money from the gambling industry with no strings attached. We take money from state governments who are also big proponents of the gambling industry, or also they're also very involved in the gambling industry. We work with state regulators. We work with tribes. So we're a membership-based nonprofit. And if you want to be involved, you can pay a membership fee as an individual, as a corporation, or as a state affiliate chapter. And you're very familiar with the Nevada Council on Problem Gambling, which is our local arm there in the state of Nevada. So all of those groups pay us a membership fee. And then, of course, we also get donations from people like the National Football League. That our biggest funder now, which may surprise a lot of people, our biggest donor is the NFL. And so as gambling has changed and expanded and broadened, so too has our membership base. And I think that helps balance out concerns that people may perceive that we're too pro-gambling or too anti-gambling. The groups like the NFL are not part of the gambling industry, of course.
So we've both seen this transition, as you mentioned, NFL and the sports world. The transition when it was even difficult to advertise for the brick and mortar traditional gaming as we may know it. And how has that impacted everything? Now that sports betting is legal, you're seeing, again, a national movement by the sporting organizations to engage. What does that really mean to your organization with their help?
I think it's changed the playing field for us in a number of ways. They're challenging, but also it's provided a number of opportunities. We have always conceived of gambling addiction as a national public health issue. But when the conversation back in the 80s and the 70s and 80s and even 90s, when the conversation was dominated mainly by several states, gambling was really seen as a state by state issue. And in some ways, of course, it always will be. It's regulated and taxed at the state level. And that's fine. That's the way we do things in the United States. But with the advent of sports betting, and as you say, the role of the leagues now and the national advertising, especially of sports betting, has changed that discussion. And now more and more people are seeing this as a national public health issue. They're not just saying, well, it's legal in one state, but it's not legal in the other. Sports betting is now, national, if not global. And that has created some opportunities for us to find some new partners and some new allies, and for us to change that conversation, because ultimately, a lot of what we want to do is destigmatize the addiction and make sure that people with problems are seen much more like people with alcohol problems rather than people with, for example, drug problems. And right now, public opinion is overwhelmingly shifted on the blame, the shame, the moral judgment towards people with gambling problems, where most Americans see someone with a substance abuse or an alcohol problem as someone who's got a medical disorder that's preventable and treatable. So we've got a big change to make, but it's starting to change. And a lot of that comes from these new conversations about gambling as a national issue, not just a local, regional kind of moral one, but a national public health issue.
I wished earlier in the year that I was in the advertising business, because it seems to be a saturation for sports betting. Do you see a saturation happening?
We do.
In the field of sports betting and some of these other areas?
Yeah, we're hearing about it from people with gambling problems who are reporting that it's impacting their recovery. This bombardment of ads that they can't get away from, not just on TV, but on social media, in the digital space. We're hearing it from state legislators and regulators who legalized, I think when they legalized sports betting, they thought it was going to be a lot like casinos in the 90s. And now they're realizing that this is 2022 and advertising is far, far different. And then we're also hearing about it even from members of Congress. So, we receive calls. As you know, a lot of policy at the national level gets driven by local constituents. We're hearing from members of Congress who say, My constituents are being bombarded by these ads. They're fed up, they're frustrated, they're seeing its negative impact. What can you, member of Congress, do? And so members of Congress have reached out to us and said, what can we do? And we certainly have some discussions and some answers for them. But we're hearing it from almost everybody that the ads are new, they're saturating, and they are seen, I think, ultimately as being as much negative as they are positive.
So with the expansion that we've seen, and of course, kudos to all the organizations, personal and corporate, that are supporting what you're doing and your efforts. What does all that mean from a funding? Is there, I know the answer to this question, but is there enough enforcement? Is there enough assistance? Is there enough to help with the problems that are out there today? Is enough being invested?
Well, problem gambling, we always say, has been last funded, least funded, and first cut. So during this most recent COVID-related economic cutback, many states cut their problem gambling funding. And even as gambling was being expanded in those same states to help fill budget gaps. So the last time we did a national survey in 2016, it was less than 25 cents per problem gambler per capita. And quite frankly, this is many orders of magnitude less than the per capita spending on any other behavioral health issue. And it was skewed even further by the fact that in some states, the spending is zero. So in Washington, D.C., there's literally no government money spent on any problem gambling services whatsoever. And so, that average is actually a little bit generous because it includes some states that are spending a lot more. So it was underfunded. And now we've had this huge expansion of gambling, John. And as you know, not every state is put public money into these new gambling expansion bills. So I would say we're still way behind the curve. We believe, the National Council believes, that 1% of gambling revenue is probably enough to mitigate this problem. So 1% of national gambling revenue would be around $1.1 billion. The last time we surveyed this in 2016, 72 million was being spent. So you remember that the missile gap, right? And Kennedy, We've got this huge gap with the Soviets. Well, we have a much, much, much bigger gap. And even if you add in all the private spending of all the gambling companies that we've both worked with, that's maybe another 200, 300 million. So even at the most generous calculation, let's say there's 500 million being spent every year to prevent and treat gambling addiction. That still leaves us about 500 million short of just dedicating the equivalent of 1%. So that 1% goal, I think we'll get there. Honestly, I think we do, because obviously gambling addiction comes with its own funding source. So the tools are there. It's really just a matter of, this is where your expertise goes, political will. It's a matter of public policy and political will. And I think that's changing as well.
So I just want to help be one of your fundraisers. That's why I brought it up, that we can always take checks, money orders, and online, right, to support the cause. Tell us the difference between gaming and gambling.
It's a fabulous question. That's the $1 million question right now. So the way we would see it, we have shifted away from the term gaming applying to the commercial industry. Because right now, what we're seeing is gaming is really talking about video gaming, computer-based, not gambling activities. So this is the kind of stuff that you do on Xbox and Nintendo, and it's something mainly, not mainly, but something that the children tend to do. Gambling, we think, is the better term for the regulated gambling games, whether they're online or domestic, whether it's sports betting or lottery. So the distinction we make is it's kind of continuum. There's the legal gambling side, the legal regulated gambling side, and then there's the gaming side, which is largely unregulated. And that's the more traditional video gaming. And obviously you can have, things sort of in the middle, but I think that's an important distinction, because there's a lot of policy issues around the gaming space right now. And I don't think the commercial casino industry or the lottery industry wants to be tied into the gaming debates and discussions that are going on. Because there are some really, really, I think, very challenging regulatory issues that the gambling industry shouldn't have to engage in, because this is clearly an activity for adults, regulated at the state level and all that. Gaming is none of those things, and it poses some real policy challenges.
So I guess the next part of that would be a natural question. With the pandemic, people having spent more time at home, possibly playing more of social gaming, and the intersection between social gaming and gambling. There's esports, there's all different avenues now to engage. You can bet on the player, you can bet on a number of things. So what do we need to do into the future on working with that situation and what's happened over the last couple of years?
It's a great question. The gambling side of this equation is regulated, is generally responsible. Could they do more? Yes, of course. But there's enormous revenue to be made, and it's a relatively closed market. And I think that's one of the reasons gambling has expanded, because people see it as, if not safe, at least it is something that is overseen. The gaming space is unregulated. It's for any age, but mainly children. There's no protections in place besides some voluntary consumer protections. And so I think what you see is an enormous growth in both spaces, of course, but on the gambling side, at least there's protections put into place. At least there's a recourse for consumers. I don't think you have that in the gaming side. And as you say, there's a lot of merging going on right now, but it seems to me that all the success that gambling has had is because it's been regulated. And right now, I don't know how you put your arms around that gaming space, but there's a lot of danger right there. I think for consumers, not just for children, but for regular consumers. We know that the money being made on social casino right now, which operates outside of regulation, is in the tens of billions of dollars a year, and people that are paying to play a free game. And many of these people, I would argue, absolutely meet the criteria for gambling addiction. And we've seen a lot of litigation around this already. And I think it's ripe there. It's ripe for abuse, and it's ripe for some real oversight.
Keith, has tech, big tech, of course, you and I are in DC, I'm across the street from the Capitol, and hear the chatter every day about big tech and their role. Have they engaged in helping with responsible gambling? Sorry.
Yeah, no, yeah, I do it too. It's
that's why I usually say both. It's usually like this, so I don't miss something. But yeah, yes.
I used to work at the American Gaming Association. Yeah. And so it is. I think, the story of tech is how you use it. And so I believe that tech may revolutionize our understanding of normative gambling behavior, as well as problematic gambling behavior. We'll have data sets with millions of people. We'll have information on every single bet they made online. All this other data that can be compiled. There may be thousands of markers of potential harm, or even better, tens of thousands of markers of potential protective behavior. I would like to learn more about what helps someone gamble responsibly, rather than what makes someone gamble problematically. And so tech may revolutionize our entire understanding of how and why people gamble, and allow us to maybe even spot things before you even know you may have a problem. But on the flip side, you have to use it responsibly. And most states don't require operators to use any of the data or any of the tech they have for responsible gambling purposes. So when we see examples in the UK and Europe where operators are required, they're affirmatively required, any data you collect, you have to also analyze it from a responsible gambling perspective. To my knowledge, not a single regulator in the United States has any sort of similar provision. So I think our operators are leading from behind, and the ultimate impact of technology, and thus if there will be a backlash in the United States, really depends on how not just a few leading operators use their technology for good, because we know that there's a number of operators in the US that are using this tech for responsible gambling, but many of their competitors aren't. And we have to judge the industry by the lowest common denominator, not by the highest. And so I think there's a number of risks there for the companies that aren't using their technology to the maximum. They're not just giving themselves a black eye, but they're giving the entire industry a black eye.
So I know we just have a few more moments, and a couple areas I'm going to ask you about is the legislative side. Again, being right here in DC, I'm going to save that just for a second. What steps are being taken to protect the consumer right now by the industry, by groups as yours? What's out there? Because again, I've had the honor of serving with you on a number of panels across
Yeah.
the world, and I've heard you walk through all the steps and how important it is that the industry continue what they're doing. But can you share for audience some of those things that you're seeing happening that should give some comfort to
Yeah.
our listeners?
There's some great innovation going on in the payment space. So there's a number of leading companies that have teamed together to say, hey, let's look at the data we collect on payments and let's try and see if there are, markers of gambling related harm. Let's look at this and see really how, especially digital payments, if there can be danger. So there's reports that are coming out that I think will tell us a lot, because while you may have 20 different loyalty accounts, you probably only have 1 or 2 bank accounts that you're using to gamble. So the second thing I would say is single customer view can be incredibly powerful. And the more the industry tries to harmonize their various loyalty data and payments data and all the other pieces of separate siloed data into one view of you as a customer, that may really enable us to have a lot more power detecting possible problematic play and helping just gently behaviorally nudge you in the right direction. So I think that's the third big issue that the industry is doing a really interesting job on, is how can we give you, a tailored, targeted marketing offering that is going to nudge you in a more responsible direction. Right now, most of those nudges are dark nudges: play more, spend more, take more time, more money, more da da da. But we can use all that same technology, all that same understanding to nudge you to, hey, John, have you set your limits yet? Or have you taken a risk quiz? Or, are you aware that your play is now accelerated to the point where you're on track to spend your entire annual budget? Very simple, easy tools. So there's a lot going on there. And those are just the tech things. There's the other thing I'd like to highlight is that there are now more people in the American gambling industry that have a title that says responsible gambling in it than ever before in our lifetime. And so almost every major company now, not everyone, but almost every major company has at least one person who has the authority or title of responsible gambling. And that's a big step. And then as that expands, there'll be more and more touch points for us to engage with. And as we learn as much from the industry as the industry learns from us on responsible gambling, it is truly a team effort.
Well, in full disclosure, as you know, through the years, I have represented, and our company's represented, a number of international gaming companies. Mm-hmm. And we've watched closely how they have evolved and how the steps that they're taking to make it safe and secure with all the information that you are mentioning. I just want to, again, full disclosure, we don't currently represent gaming companies. I, like you, I'm here pro bono supporting what you're doing, Keith. So I just really want to make that clear. Also, what's happening with advertising? And then they got 2 more questions after that, but how's it changed? What's going on with advertising?
So as you know, there used to be federal prohibitions on the broadcast advertising of gambling, and those have largely fallen aside. Now you had some informal prohibitions, or that were done by the leagues. Those have all gone aside now too. So you have an opportunity. It's a really rare moment in our history when there's no national advertising restrictions. That may not last. But while it lasts, I think we're relying on voluntary self-regulation. I think there's some advantages to that, but there's also some disadvantages because no one entity oversees all advertising. You have the trade associations. AGA's got a great code of conduct, but they can't bind a state lottery to that code of conduct. And you have obviously hundreds of different regulators at the state level, at the tribal level, even at the vertical level. You've got states that still have a lottery commission, a racing commission, and a casino commission that haven't harmonized. So that's the danger with advertising, is that, again, a bad actor, lowest common denominator, someone who operates in a state that doesn't have a lot of good regulation and is going to do something egregious, and there's going to be a backlash. But the positive side is that there's so much now more promotion of things like our national helpline. The calls are going through the roof. We saw 50% increase in calls just last year alone. A lot of that is driven by gambling industry partners. And so that's there's a silver lining, I think, in advertising.
So you've had success through Congress, the National Defense Appropriation Act a couple of years ago, in making sure that there's screening for the gambling addiction within the military. And currently, you're working on legislation to really elevate Again, the practice, but also the disclaimers and notices for health and safety for the military, correct? That's a priority for you now, about 3,000 or so slot machines around the world, give or take?
Yeah, a lot of folks don't know that the military is actually kind of a medium-sized casino company. There's more than 3,000 slots at our overseas bases. The handle, because many of you are on this webinar are gambling folks, so the handle's $1 billion, and the revenue is about $100 million a year from servicemen and their dependents that have lost $100 million on these slot machines. All we want to do is say the same types of standards for responsible gambling you would see in Nevada, you should see at our overseas bases. Signage, warning signs, how to gamble responsibly. This is, John, this is the lowest hanging fruit.
That seems like a no-brainer to me, Keith.
Seems like we've been.
But we know how Congress works and the Senate,
Yep.
But I applaud you. I think I am happy to help any way I can with that.
Thank you. Yeah.
The last question, problem gambling. What are signs? What should we look for? How can we help a loved one or a friend that need our help the most? What are some of the signs?
The important thing to know is that it is treatable, that there's hope and help available. So if you know someone who is gambling more than they intended, if they are unable to set and stick to limits of time and money, if gambling is starting to cause harm, and not just financial harm, but also harm to their friends, their family, their professional career, they're depressed when they're not gambling. Those are all warning signs that gambling that started out recreationally may be on its way to becoming a problem. And the good news is we operate a nationwide referral service. So, you can call, text, or chat to 800-522-4700, and we will direct you to specific help in your state. It's toll-free, it's confidential, and the vast majority of people who have problems and seek help are able to recover. So roughly 65% of people who've gone through a course of treatment who've attended Gamblers Anonymous are free from gambling problems within that year. So there's hope and help available. It works if you work it. Our issue is just making sure people have access to that helpline so they can get those resources at the state level.
So what does Gambling Anonymous look like? So we have an understanding how it works.
It's Gamblers Anonymous is a self-help group, and so the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop gambling. There are chapters across the country. There are women-specific chapters. There's meetings in Spanish. Nowadays, of course, post-pandemic, there's a lot of Zoom meetings. So you can make a meeting any day. It might not be in your state. It might be around the world somewhere, but there are meetings 24/7. And there's a lot more people who are now comfortable going on Zoom, for example, to catch a meeting. So it's really expanded the opportunity for people to seek help and to talk to peers. The thing that works so well about Gamblers Anonymous is you're talking to peers. And I've never met someone who went to GA that didn't say, "Oh, I think my story's worse. I think, no one looks at gambling the same way. No one's lost as much money." And the first day they go into those rooms, they find not only are there people that absolutely know that story, but they've actually lost more money than you. And so there's a lot of humility in those rooms, but the power and wisdom of that recovery is incredible.
So Keith, as a loved one or a friend, we can contact that number as well and get guidance on how we should communicate to help, again, our friends.
About 30% of the callers to our national helpline, we had 277,000 callers last year. About 30% of those calls come from loved ones and family members of problem gamblers. The gambler may still be out there. They still think that they're one bet away from winning everything back. And it's a third of our callers are family members who are saying exactly that. How can I talk to, where can they go for help? How can I understand it better? And we'd spend a lot of time helping loved ones with financial issues. And there's free materials on our website too. Financial issues for loved ones of problem gamblers.
Well, please give my appreciation to your board and certainly Keith, on behalf of the National Council on Problem Gambling. We do appreciate your time. I would ask that next time we talk a little bit about the albums that are on the wall. I see we have the Doors there. There's probably a Beatles album or two. I think we can have a conversation on music as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a shared, it's the world language. No, John, I truly appreciate it. It's always been great. You've always been a big supporter of responsible gambling, and we really appreciate your work and the opportunity to be here aside from politics.
Thank you, Keith. And as I said in the beginning, all we ask is you sit back and put politics aside. And I hope everyone's enjoyed it today. Please reach out to Keith if you have any questions, the National Council on Problem Gaming. Thank you. Please be safe. Look forward to seeing you soon in person.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John.
Take care. Thank you.